I want to talk to you guys about a movement. I want to talk to you guys about a new norm where teachers are the undisputed driving force behind education, innovation, and change. And I call that vision Occupy EdTech. And so, who am I? So I'm Khalid. I've had several different vocations or occupations, but I think of myself as a leader, coach, and entrepreneur. The title might change, and I want to tell you about one thing that I learned in one of those titles, which was education leader for Startup Weekend Education. And in that role, Startup Weekend Education are 54-hour events where designers, developers, business leaders, entrepreneurs, and teachers all get together for 54 hours, and they go through a hackathon environment where they pitch an idea, they form a team, and then they are challenged to form a live and thriving business over the weekend, from Friday night to have it up and running on Sunday. And from mid-2011 through 2012, I spent about 40 out of 60 weekends facilitating these events all over the world. So I went throughout the US, I went to London, I went to New Delhi, and saw entrepreneurs getting together with educators and designers and thinking and talking about education problems. And I want to talk to you about what we learned in that and how in doing something, I actually learned the problem that we were trying to solve. So quickly, giving you guys the background before I get into the prescriptions, the real crux of the matter, what we got to, was that educators didn't feel invited into this world of EdTech. They felt that it was something that was often imposed on them and that there was several barriers to them being able to get into this world and to be able to be at cause or have agency within it. And we were trying to figure out what was going on there. So one of the big challenges we had when we started was that Startup Weekend kind of started with this idea of how do we get more IQ points out of some of these designers and developers who are really smart. How do we get them to occupy their time with education problems? How do we get them involved in this world? And as we started to start these events and we said, hey, they're going to be focused on education, one of the first challenges that we had was that we had a really tough time defining what was an education idea, what was education entrepreneurship. There were lots of ideas. There were texting solutions that happened to be for teachers to talk to their students. Was that an education idea? And so we were debating about what those were. But every once in a while, an idea would pop up that really changed things and made everyone, including the teachers in the room, sort of perk up and say, wow, that's really awesome. And so we started looking at those ideas, and what I began to see was that there were good and bad ideas that were couched with good business models, but every once in a while what you saw was an education reform idea that happened to be packaged in something that got people excited, which was this thing called a sustainable business model. And so I started to shift the language from saying that we were looking for EdTech to saying that we were looking for ideas that looked like EdTech-fueled education reform. And that shift in vocabulary changed everything. So just to give you guys a brief background on this, so this is sort of the two worlds that come together in EdTech-fueled education reform. And so on the left, I borrowed this from a Deb Myers blog post on one side. And so you have this education reform movement. And there are groups that seem innocuous at first, children first, students first, stand for children, until you start asking yourselves, well, this is a reform group, right? So they're trying to change something. So who's not standing for children? Who's not putting children first? And immediately when you see that, it puts the educator, the people who are in this on a daily basis, sort of on their back foot and saying, well, I'm not one of those, I'm trying to help. On the other side, you have the language of consumer-driven EdTech. So it's actually a pigeon of four kind of languages. You got your developer languages, your GitHubs, your Rubies, your PHPs. In the middle there, you have your language of designers. You have user experience, user interfaces, A/B testing, CSS. Those are the designers that come in. The third one down are your startup aficionados. They're doing minimal viable products. They're talking about Kanban and the orders in which they're doing things. They're Turking things, which is this mechanical Turk sort of service, which means that you kind of do it by force and brute force before you actually develop it. And then you have the language of the financiers. And so in walks a teacher to this world, And they don't speak any of these different languages, and there's all this community coming together, and they were really having a tough time. And so we began to focus on what would it take for us to be able to equip teachers to lead in this type of environment. And what was really interesting is that when these two groups necessarily get together, there were these buzzwords that came out that they were often focused on, and those the teachers knew. See, it was the solutions that they were coming up with was these ideas of blended or personalized or adapted, and these were all things that were the auspices of great teaching. These were things that teachers knew how to do, and they understood these. They understood that giving multiple modalities for a student to be able to show what it is that they know is a great thing to do. And that finding those modalities is part art and part science, and that's how you personalize something. And that learning eventually from what works and what doesn't work and adapting as you do these assessments or observations is what makes good teaching. And so the teacher knew that they owned this objective that all of these people were focused on. They were just trying to do it from two different ways. This education reform group was saying, let's bring this new person in, this education advocate, these parents, let's empower them, and let's have them figure out how to personalize or adapt for their children. And this group, the consumer tech group, not always, but often was saying, let's bring in the technology, and the technology is going to be the savior. The technology is going to be what's going to be blended or personalized or adaptive. Well, Occupy EdTech was about how do we empower educators to be able to take back this term innovation. I looked at the Occupy movement, and the teaching is the largest profession in the United States, and I don't know the statistics of it. I probably should because I'm presenting to you guys. But the point is that in my world of EdTech, it's a really small world. You're in here for about 2 or 3 months, and you pretty much know everybody. And so I would venture to say there's somewhere on the order of about 5,000. And there was this big wag the dog thing going on here, where there was this huge majority and this small minority that was really exerting this undue influence. And I said, how do we, A, broaden this pie so that you have more innovation and more ideas? How do you start a movement such that all people are involved in this? But then B, what do you do with all of these educators that want to be involved and want to be part of the solution and the process? And how do you empower them to take back this sort of movement that's being imposed on them? So now I'll get into some prescriptions. So that was all the background for you guys. So I looked at my friend Merriam-Webster and asked him what about Occupy we could use. And so definition 1 was that Occupy is about taking time or filling up. And so Ken Robinson said that the standardization of student learning was something that was really constraining. And what I wanted to say was that the same thing happens in teacher learning, that teachers need to figure out how to diversify their professional development and expand that, and that is going to be one of the ways in which they can continue to grow. I wrote a blog post about Jiro Dreams of Sushi, and it's an awesome movie about an 85-year-old sushi chef. And in it, he talks about this, he has this 10-person restaurant that serves $300 a plate sushi. And when you watch this documentary, he has these 5 chefs in it, and he spends all of his time teaching and developing and working with these chefs. And what you notice is that they're eating all the time. And so you say, wait, with 5 chefs and 3 meals a day, that's $1,500 worth of food per meal, at 3 meals a day, that's $4,500 that he's consuming every day of the sushi that he's meticulously preparing. And one of the times the director asks him about it, and the cameraman and Jiro responds that part of their development is to understand what their best tastes like. They have to know and have a more refined palate than their customers. And if they have a more refined palate than their customers, then they in turn can delight them every time they experience their sushi. And that was a commitment to professional development that I said, wow, like that's amazing. I would love to see education have that type of commitment. So cross-discipline PD is about ideas, and innovation comes from this cross-contamination or this cross-pollination of ideas. And it's about connecting, communicating, innovating, and creating. And so the first step for all educators is just think more broadly and take ownership of your own professional development. And everyone knows about PLCs, and so I won't go into that. But it's about learning how to communicate and how to affect others with ideas. It's about learning the innovation process. There's a science to innovation. And then it's about learning creation. Like there's this, if you learn 4 notes so that you can teach someone who has 3, it's not becoming a master and knowing how to program and code your own games, etc., but it's about learning the skills of development that are out there and learning how people are creating and helping others to create. It's about facilitating that creation process that Sir Ken Robinson talked about. So number 2, Occupy, is about being a resident. And this one is about being a regular occupant of your local ed innovation scene. So it's about not just connecting to other folks and not just trying to have these cross-discipline experience, but actually going to these experiences. So having run one of these long hackathon type events, I'll say that there is something important to putting yourself in an environment where you are immersed continuously for 24 or 54 hours in a particular topic. There's one thing to say, I'm going to connect with some people and I'm going to have a conversation with them over Twitter. It's totally different. There are experiences, there are epiphany problems, and there are construction or problems that you can solve by thinking about them for a long time. And by being in a situation for 54 hours, what you learn is that the lack of sleep and the situations that you get in allow your limbic system to then help you solve problems and to get into a deeper level of engagement with them. So continuing to go to these and do something that scares you every day is something that I promote greatly. And then in those experiences, it's also about finding a coach. And coaches are very important because it's not about the coach being an expert and being able to tell you everything wrong with what you're doing or coach you and tell you how they did this problem. Coaches are really about good listeners, and much like education, coaching is about changing the conversation. It's about asking questions that cause people to think and then change the tenor of the conversation that they're having and allow them to do that. And finding these coaches is a great way for teachers to be able to own their professional development. The third definition is to employ the intention of. And so one of the advantages that teachers have is that they encounter education problems all the time. And one of the disadvantages that many people who are working in education entrepreneurship have is that they have this tacit relationship with education where they went through it at some point and can speak to, well, this was a problem that I had when I was in teaching, and this is what I believe that is going to help education. But teachers have these particular problems, and oftentimes the success of a new endeavor or an innovation is really based on how well it's grounded within education innovation. So there are going to be others who come up and talk about design thinking and some of the great practices that help you learn and become better at innovation. And so one of the practices that we found really helped teachers when they came and they wanted to lead these teams and come in an environment where they had a great idea and they understood was to put them through this process early of picking a problem, forming a team, creating a solution, and testing it and continuing to iterate. And you don't have to do that from a, I'm going to start a startup standpoint. You can do that from a situation where I have this particular problem and I want to figure out how we're going to arrange this, how are we going to turn in these homeworks, or how are we going to deal with this particular challenge that we're having in our classrooms. You can start small and continue to iterate through these processes and go into design thinking. So the fourth one is about holding positions. And so one of the things that I spend a lot of time coaching teachers through is that these titles of creation, whether they're author or painter or photographer or entrepreneur, all of these things are claimed. There is no, this person is imposing on me, or these groups of people are coming into our environment and they're doing this. Every one of these titles is something that someone came in and decided to claim. And similarly, educators have just as much opportunity, and probably more so, to be able to claim this title of entrepreneur or innovator within the education space. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give up teaching or change that, but it does mean that you can create ideas, that you can come together with people within your learning community, and you can create your own solutions for problems. Business models. I spend a ton of time talking to educators about business models, and one of the top tips that I tell them is be curious about how things work around you. Whether that's the Google that you use or the Freedom Car that you try, don't be afraid of the business models. It's not that the act of creating a business is not something that is inherently wrong or that has challenges to it. I find a lot of teachers who are very interested in creating something and being able to give it away for free. And what I tell them is that if you haven't sustainably solved your problem, then you haven't actually solved it. You've only solved it temporarily as a solution. And so the last part of Occupy is that it's about taking control of the situation. And so the two things that teachers really have the advantage to do is to be able to come together as a community and learn how to strategically consume EdTech. The thing that startups live and die on necessarily is their early adoption and who takes them in, who tries them out, and where they get their first customers. And teachers have a huge opportunity to be able to create a community that can decide collectively which ones of these choices of technology solutions they'd like to be able to try, which ones are actually best suited for them as teachers and for their user experience, and then which ones they'd like to be able to promote and how they would share that with other teachers. And so teachers have this inherent home field advantage, I call it, in terms of their understanding of the problem, their ability to be able to implement, and their ability to be able to evaluate and iterate because they're in the classroom and they have what these technology solutions need. If they can broaden their breadth of understanding and figure out and get better at being able to scale and use technologists, then they can create solutions that will be both suited to their needs and suited for them as entrepreneurs. What I wanted to say that we should build was innovation leadership within education. And there's 4 components of that, which is the entrepreneurial OCD, the focus on the problem, understanding of pedagogy, which doesn't happen outside of people within education, learning the innovation processes, and then understanding the experience and empathy for educators. And that's the movement that I think will create change that we can build and learn from and understand how to create long-lasting change within education. Thank you.